Don't do that.
Being naked isn't the same as sex, you know.
Welcome to CHW Studios, and today we recapping the movie The Passion of Darkly Noon. Exhausted and at the end of his rope, Darkly Noon stumbles and collapses onto a forest road where Jude narrowly avoids running him over. Jude, an Undertaker's assistant, brings the unconscious man to a secluded house, calling for Callie. Emerging from the trees, Callie suggests bringing Darkly inside upon seeing his condition. Before doing so, Jude asks about her partner Clay's whereabouts. As they lay Darkly on the bed, he briefly wakes up, and Callie reassures him he is safe. Jude suggests Clay may have left for good. But Callie remains calm, telling him to start loading the truck since no one will help. After Jude loads the last coffin, Callie assures him her guest will recover quickly. She asserts Clay loves her and will eventually return. Jude agrees and presents a tool Clay had ordered, which Callie instructs him to store in the barn. Jude unloads the supplies and suggests Callie fetch them herself, but she refuses to face the judgmental townspeople. Jude reminds her he won't always be there, as he plans to leave and become a writer, soon after Jude drives off as a storm hits. Later, Callie searches Darkly's clothes and finds a Bible with his name and a photo of a couple inside. The next day, a disoriented Darkly wakes and stumbles upon the sleeping Callie. She introduces herself while making breakfast. Callie reveals she lives with Clay, a carpenter who makes coffins but is currently walking in the woods, whispering a prayer. Darkly asks if she found his Bible. Callie asks about the dedication, and Darkly explains he chose his name by randomly opening the Bible, as was customary in his religious community. Callie then asks if the photo is of his parents, which Darkly confirms were killed when vicious townspeople attacked his community. Empathizing as a fellow outcast, Callie offers for Darkly to stay as long as he likes, and shows him the comfortable barn loft where she once stayed. In the morning, Darkly is transfixed watching Callie work on the house. He eventually offers to help, but she says the house will fall apart without Clay. Inside, Darkly declares the peas need salt, not sugar. Callie talks about the strictness of his upbringing, saying not everyone shares his religious fervor. Suddenly, gunshots ring out, and Callie rushes outside with a rifle, yelling at the woods to leave her in peace. She explains to the concerned Darkly that the gunshots are just a recurring looming presence. When her bullets run out, she reassures her guest and returns inside. After dinner, Darkly excuses himself, unable to stay due to his values, despite Callie's invitation. Later, he watches Callie lament Clay's absence. The next scorching day, Callie suggests cooling off at a spring, challenging Darkly's beliefs. She then shows ancient paintings in a cave, pointing to a red handprint, saying, part of its maker lives on. Drawn to Callie's mystique, Darkly confesses his feelings, but she stops him, caring for him as family. That night, distracted by Callie, Darkly fails to pack his belongings. The next day, Darkly picks flowers, but is downcast when Clay returns. Noticing a bird made of barbed wire, Darkly accidentally cuts himself, ignoring Callie's calls. That evening, Callie asks Clay if Darkly can stay permanently, explaining her silent partner communicates without words. Clay signals approval, and Callie shows her appreciation. When Darkly remarks on their lack of wedding rings, Callie clarifies they aren't married. Later that night, torn between beliefs and jealousy, Darkly adds Callie's apple core to his collection before going to bed. The next day, Darkly apprentices under the carpenter Clay, but annoys him with personal questions about Callie. That night, Darkly prays for guidance. On the seventh day, Clay tries bonding through tricks, but guests arrive as Darkly expresses frustration. Jude and the Undertaker, Quincy, order coffins. Callie warmly welcomes them and introduces the recovered Darkly to Jude. Quincy introduces himself before escaping the heat on the porch. Distracted by watching Callie, Darkly ignores Jude's conversation. Attempts concerned Jude invites Darkly for a cliffside talk. Jude tells Darkly that he understands Darkly's feelings for Callie, knowing her allure over men. However, he cautions that Callie and Clay have been inseparable since meeting. Having brought Darkly to Callie's home, Jude feels accountable for his conduct. Thus, he advises Darkly to respect Callie and Clay's relationship. When Darkly adamantly denies any affection for Callie, Jude politely apologizes. Still, he urges the man he rescued to heed his words, even if mistaken. To change topics, Jude shows Darkly a fossilized dinosaur dropping, making Darkly laugh for the first time. They quickly become friends. As Quincy's visit ends, Jude promises to return that night. Seeking escape from his perplexing feelings for Callie, Darkly takes a stroll. The next morning, Darkly awakes in the woods to a peculiar sight, a giant silver shoe floating down the river. He watches it until out of view. A vicious fight ensues until Jude shoots and kills the former apprentice, who wonders who will love him now that he's become a monster. Jude and Callie barely escape the burning home with Clay. The next morning, a circus family emerges from the forest. Noticing Callie's state, they offer help getting out of the woods. As the group exits, the man's son gives Callie a small silver shoe, a token from their sunken circus boat. Unaware, Callie heads out, while the apprentice's wounds fester, poisoning him figuratively.